I think one thing I wanted to say before I sort of dove into how we pivoted is that I've been involved in the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, NCTSN, for like a decade plus. And there are people who have been pushing the needle on DEI work for much longer than I've been around. And so while I'm going to acknowledge and share some of the work that's been done more recently, it's on the shoulders of people who have been passionately committed and bringing great expertise to this work for a very long time, and for whom I'm so grateful. I think that it's probably worth noticing that we have committees that convene within the NCTSN. One specifically we call the Racial Trauma Subcommittee, Racial Justice Subcommittee, and then one that is around the Anti-Racist Faculty Summit, Anti-Racism Faculty, and our Cultural Consortium, that have really been a place where we have been having DEI conversations, and where a great deal of expertise within our network tends to come together and move this work. And yet we still have a long way to go. There's no way that I would say that we've arrived, but we're working really hard. And some of the examples I thought I'd share today are examples of a broader culture shift and or evidence of things that I'm really excited about. The first one being how we talk about the use of evidence-based treatments with an eye towards evidence and who built it, for whom, by whom. We've always been a network around clinical care that's embraced this idea of practice-informed research, research-informed practice. But now there's a much greater focus and a much stronger appetite for that practice and that research to be informed by lived expertise, by the voices of those who are most affected and who are in the communities and represent marginalized populations and identities that get to center their definition of what evidence is and what healthy or what outcomes they're looking for, rather than simply, if you've successfully navigated a very hierarchical sort of randomized control trial, therefore you get to define what evidence is. In similar vein, we've also really spent a lot of more time and resources creating structures and mechanisms for people with lived experience and expertise, families and children who have experienced trauma, who have experienced the impact of racism, who have sought out services and had their lived wisdom informing all of our projects, whether it's a presentation, whether it's a resource, whether it's a training, so that we are really thinking about not only what we're creating, but how we're creating it in a way that's more of a shared power kind of methodology. And then I'm really excited about us engaging in our own vulnerability as learners. You know, people in the NCTSN, it sounds funny, but members of our network happen to be some of the foremost experts, sometimes internationally, in the area of child traumatic stress. So being able to hold a great deal of really incredible expertise comes fairly naturally, which I think makes it even more phenomenal that we're also willing to embrace that we have a lot to learn around anti-racist practices and pull our internal expertise, but look at this as something that we are going to constantly have to work at, not simply say we've arrived, because we haven't. And we need to continue to interrogate this. And then last is this idea where if, as we're going, getting individuals who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, and or those who hold marginalized identities into leadership roles and decision-making roles, as we begin to recognize that we value experience and expertise in DEI as a core non-negotiable value and what we expect in leadership, then who has been at our leadership tables and who has been having power in decision-making has really been able to shift in a very visible way. And I've heard conversations around hiring and promoting and elevating being tied very clearly to trauma-informed care and diversity and equity-informed values on par with each other. So those are just some examples.